Hello, welcome to Wrexham. I'm Stephanie Ellis and I'm going to read a chapter today from my bio-horror novella, Paused. To set the scene a little bit, I'll read you the blurb. A terrifying pandemic sweeps the world, rendering its victims completely immobile, but leaving them conscious with their minds intact. The victims are helpless against the environment, completely at the mercy of wild animals, weather, out-of-control fires and other dangers. There's no hope for those safe in their homes either, as they slowly starve to death, unable to feed themselves or drink. Dr. Alex Griffiths leads a team racing against time to find a cure before it's too late. Will he succeed? And the chapter I'm going to read actually features the daughters of Dr. Griffiths. It makes you think about what you would do if you found someone in that situation, if they were that vulnerable. Would you help them? Would you take advantage? Would you use it as an opportunity for revenge, perhaps? It's one of the conditions I think is the most frightening to suffer from, to be faced with, and that's partly why I wrote the book. Chapter 3. Nick and Sian sat 2 seats back from Rosie on the bus home from school. The sisters managed to avoid her during the day, but there would always come a point when she homed in on one or another of them. A missile waiting to explode in their faces, the fallout horrible and public. It was Friday, however, and a weekend of respite awaited them. Yet it wasn't any comfort to Nick that they weren't the only ones targeted by the girl. She was an out-and-out bitch to all and sundry. At least Rosie was in her last year, like Nick, and they would be going their separate ways. If she'd been a year younger, it would have left Sian to deal with Rosie on her own, and Nick's younger sister would have found that extremely difficult to handle. "At least she's by herself for once," whispered Sian. Yeah. The absence of Rosie's usual gang of misery was a surprise. Nick sensed a chance. The desire to get even bubbled up. Payback time. "Look, there's 2 of us and 1 of her. Why don't we get off when she does? Talk to her, try and get her to stop." Sian looked at Nick as if she was crazy. Perhaps she was, but even 6 months more of her incessant bullying was too much to countenance. Nick wanted it to stop, and stop now. "She gets off and takes the footpath over the wreck," said Nick. "No one will see us." "Very cloak and dagger," said Sian, still looking unconvinced. "Well, if it all goes wrong, I don't really want anyone to see," said Nick. "Or film," said Sian with feeling. Both had been subjected to unfortunate uploads to various platforms, public shaming they've not been able to confide to their parents. Nick watched Rosie press the button, ping the bell to stop the bus. She remained in her seat. "Not going after her then?" asked Sian, relief flooding her face. "Yes," said Nick, "but we get off at the next stop. We can loop around quite quickly and catch her up. Getting off at the same stop would be a bit too obvious." Nobody paid them any attention as they got off. They were almost the last of the school crowd, another blessing. Nick could see Rosie disappearing over the crest of the common. "Come on," she said, nudging her sister, and broke into a jog. She trusted to Rosie's dawdling gait that they would soon catch up. It was relatively easy going on this part of the wreck, a wide open space which normally featured teens hurtling around on illegal mini-bikes or generally being a nuisance. The corner Rosie was heading for was more of a wilderness, full of brambles and high hedgerows, a place for illicit drugs, boozing and uncomfortable sex, other secrets they hadn't shared with their parents. The 2 sped up, Nick not wanting to let Rosie get beyond the hedges, Sian not wanting to lose Nick. The older sister hurtled around the corner and came to a sudden stop, her younger sibling cannoning hard into her. Rosie stood in the middle of the footpath, hands on hips, staring at them. "Thought you could put one over on me." She stepped closer to Nick. Nick frowned. They hadn't let their voices carry. The grass had muffled their tread. Rosie grinned. "I'd stopped to check the signal on my phone and saw you 2 get off the bus. Wondered why you did that. So here we are. What are we going to do about it?" She took another step forward. Nick could smell the mint on Rosie's breath, teeth grinding at the gum in her smirking mouth, the mouth Nick wanted to smack. Her hands clenched at her sides, fists balled, ready to lash out. Then Nick felt Sian's hand on her arm, her sister tugging her back. She glanced at Sian, annoyed at the distraction, saw the fear in her sister's eyes, which suddenly widened at something behind Nick. She whipped around, but too late. Rosie had landed a heavy blow to the side of her head, sending her spinning to the ground. "You should know by now you never mess with me," said Rosie, looking down at her. The smile had gone, and there was a cold, hard expression on her face. "Time you were taught a proper lesson." Both of you. Nick managed a quick look at Sian. She looked ready to run, but hadn't done so yet. She pushed herself back up, waiting for another blow as she did so. It didn't matter that Rosie was stronger. Nick had had enough. Even if she came off worse, she had an overwhelming urge to hit back, to punch and kick the cow, to hurt her. The blow didn't come. Rosie had started to swing her foot, ready to put the boot in, and then stopped. Nick stared up at her foe in astonishment. All life seemed to have fled from the girl. Rosie's eyes were fixed on Nick, but they'd gone blank. She appeared totally unaware of anything around her, including Nick lying at her feet. Nick? What happened? Sian was staring at Rosie, but hadn't got any closer. Nick reached up and tapped Rosie's hand. No response. Standing up, she moved so she stood right in her face. The girl's mouth was open, mid-chew. A fly buzzed past and landed on Rosie's tongue. She made no response. Tentatively, Nick prodded hard. Still nothing. A vicious pinch to her cheek. Nothing. She turned and smiled at Sian. Looks like we can get a bit of payback after all. What's wrong with her? Asked Sian. Nick shrugged. Drugs? She's always had a stash of weed on her. Probably spice. The one we had that talk about the other day. Stops people from functioning. She walked around Rosie, who seemed precariously balanced. Shouldn't worry. She'll be back to her horrible normal self soon enough. In the meantime, let's enjoy the moment. A small part of her tried to tell her Rosie needed help. Nick didn't want to listen. Years of being at the receiving end had brought her to this point. She would never get another chance. Sian moved closer, reassured Rosie wouldn't suddenly lash out. She gave Rosie a hesitant push. The girl toppled to the ground, and Sian jumped back in shock, ready to run away should Rosie come to life. There was still no reaction. Lucky for her, she had a soft landing, said Nick, eyeing the mass of ferns Rosie had fallen into. A memory came back of changing room showers and taunts, those photographs. Even now they continued to resurface, shared by the boys at school as part of the general banter. She smiled and knelt down beside Rosie, started to strip her. What are you doing? Asked Sian. Only what she did to me, said Nick. Let's see how she likes it. Would you really do that to another girl after what you went through? No, said Nick. Just Rosie. Besides, there's more than just me. You know that. She's been taking photos and videos for years. Turned it into a bit of a money spinner from what I can gather. She even operates on commission. Why didn't you tell the teachers, Mum and Dad? Nick eyed her sister. Seriously? Look, you don't have to be part of this, but keep a watch for me, will you? She turned back to pulling Rosie's hoodie off, then the t-shirt, jeans down. Rosie's flesh spilled out left, right and centre. Nick rose to her feet and took a few shots, crossed Rosie's arms on her chest so she looked dead. It still wasn't enough. Not for all the shame and humiliation she had endured. She ignored Sian's pleading look and unhooked Rosie's bra. Don't worry, said Nick. She can keep her knickers on. This wasn't said out of any sense of decency, more because her underwear looked as though it hadn't been washed for a week, and she didn't want to touch her any more than she already had. She took more snaps, draped her arms and legs at different angles. Rosie proved surprisingly malleable. Enough, said Nick. I've got what I need. She turned away. We can't leave her like that, said Sian. We can't do that, even to her. Nick considered her foe. Sian was right. Come on then, help me dress her. Between them they got Rosie into her clothes and then dragged her over to the base of a nearby trunk. We're leaving her? Asked Sian, still incredulous at her sister's actions. Yes, said Nick. For a couple of hours, anyway. Then I'll pretend to discover her later, call an ambulance. I still don't like it, said Sian. You don't have to, but I can tell you one thing. If the positions were reversed, she wouldn't think twice about doing worse to us. It was true. There would have been no redressing, no putting her in a position of relative safety. Rosie would have probably charged a viewing fee, a price to touch, or more, like she did a year ago to Shelley Mackenzie when her drink had been spiked. Let's get home, she said. We need to work on Mum and Dad about that party. Dad's on a mega guilt trip about working the past couple of weekends, trying to find out what's wrong with old Sam and Beryl. It's our trump card if we play it right. Nick led the way, Sian struggling to keep up with her sister's pace, both relieved to be leaving Rosie behind. "You promise you'll make that call, won't you?" said Sian, puffing away behind her, the anxiety evident in her voice. Nick had no such qualms. Karma could be a bitch. So that's chapter 3 from Paused. I hope you enjoyed it, and maybe ask yourself what you would do if you were faced with somebody in that situation. Would you be the kind to help, or would you take advantage? Seeing the way people are with their phones these days, I'd probably think that most people would be happily snapping away. But there you go. Anyway, read it. There's Pause for you.